Hello, and thank you for joining this afternoon's CIM View from the Top webinar on Want to Boost Business? Conquer the Data. Today we're joined by Conor McGovern, who's Managing Director at Accenture Digital. But before I pass you over to Conor, I'd just like to highlight a few points. The webinar will last for around an hour and will include an interactive Q&A at the end. All delegates are muted, so during the webinar the only voices you'll hear will be mine and Conor's. You can, however, ask questions throughout the webinar by using the chat box located on your screen, and we'll then try and answer as many of these as we can fit in with time at the end. A link to the recording of the webinar will be emailed to you within the next couple of days, but don't forget you'll also have access to it via CIM's opinion page on the CIM website. Okay, I won't take up any more of your time. Over to you, Conor.
Thank you very much. Well, welcome everyone. It's a real pleasure to be speaking with you today. First, a quick introduction. So, as you've heard, my name's Conor McGovern. I'm a Managing Director at Accenture Digital. My role at Accenture is that I lead our marketing analytics capability globally. I've been at Accenture for around about 8 years, and prior to that I ran media analytics at a company called Billets, now called Ubiquity. Prior to that, I was the business development manager for a web startup in the internet bubble days of 99-2000. And in the distant past, I started my career at Deloitte Consulting. Before we get into the meat of the talk, just a quick plug for myself. I'm very active on Twitter and LinkedIn, posting and discussing on all things relating to marketing technology and analytics. So do feel free to connect or follow with me on either of those platforms. So the topic for my talk today is how to boost business through conquering the data. What I mean by conquering the data is exploiting analytics techniques and tools to defend, differentiate and disrupt in the market. Now, this is an area I personally focused in for the last 12 years, and it's a hugely exciting area to work in, just given the astronomical pace of change and the increasingly critical nature of data and analytics in marketing. So, in terms of what I want to cover today, the first is really to give a very quick and high-level view of just how much the digital is changing the world. And it's really seismic in terms of the impact that it's having. And that represents both opportunity and threats, really in equal measure, to brands and to marketers. I'll then cover some of the themes then, particularly impacting and shaping marketing from a data, analytics and economics perspective. And then close by talking through some necessarily anonymous examples of really high or leading performance that we see with some of our clients. The digital really is shaping and changing all aspects of our lives, and that pace of change continues to increase. We at Accenture Digital believe that technology will change the world significantly in the near to medium future, and that this change will have a very disruptive impact on business models. And becoming a digital business isn't just about digitized marketing or digitized operations. It's actually going to become absolutely core and essential to survival. And we created Accenture Digital to bring together our strengths in digital marketing, where I work, mobility and analytics to help our clients really accelerate their digital journeys. And the pace of change in this space is evidenced by our own growth. So as I said, I joined the team around about 8 years ago. The team I joined at the time was called Accenture Marketing Sciences. That was around 200 people globally. This team then became the core of Accenture Interactive and then latterly the real core of Accenture Digital. And in that time we've grown more than 100-fold in terms of the number of men and women that we have in the team, and the clients we serve and the revenues that we generate for Accenture. So hugely exciting. So as I said, digital is massive and it's growing exponentially, and that offers both opportunity and threat to our clients and to brands and to marketers. It does, though, require new operating models, new capabilities, and new tools to survive and to thrive. So if we just take a canter through what we mean by that, you can start to get an appreciation for why conquering data is critical to marketing. So these stats are just for a single minute on the internet. So that's 2.4 billion people connected, 38,000 photos shared on Instagram, 4 million plus searches on Google in a typical minute, over 1/3 tweets sent, over 100 hours of video uploaded onto YouTube, over 3 million likes on Facebook, over 250,000 Snapchats sent and received, 3,000 pins on Pinterest, and obviously that's rapidly growing, and $275,000 worth of transactions on PayPal. So you can start to see here just the depth of data that we have access to, and the potential opportunity that could bring to bear. Now, these stats themselves are only a couple of months old, but are already out of date. A good one that would be worth adding now is around something like Facebook and their growth in video. So Facebook have grown astronomically in video in recent months and are now doing something around 4 billion daily video views, 75% of which is on mobile. That was a number from Mark Zuckerberg earlier this week. So, Facebook looks set to overtake YouTube, certainly from a mobile perspective. And again, that offers opportunity and threat from a marketing perspective. But digital is also scary. The size and frequency of data breaches and theft is increasing, as shown here on the slide. And again, that really points to the business-critical nature of conquering the data. Now, my topic's about boosting business, so I'm going to be talking about lots of positives, but the flip side of that obviously is that failure to conquer and control the data can lead to really very severe and adverse impact on consumer confidence and on top and bottom line performance. And you can see here just the growth in the size and the growth in the number of data breaches from some very large and very trusted brands. And increasingly as well, it's becoming all about devices, and particularly connected devices. And that continues to expand and increase the deluge of data that marketers are faced with. Now, an example is with a retail client that I met with a couple of years ago. And I was meeting with their director responsible for customer insight and loyalty. Now, this client is absolutely a leader in personalization. Personalization of email, personalization of paper mailers to their customer base. And as a result have extremely high levels of loyalty and extremely high levels of conversion in their kind of traditional email and paper-based mailings. Now, the challenge that they were facing was that they recognized that it really wasn't going to be long, and this was a couple of years ago, wasn't going to be long until that monthly or quarterly mailing was just going to be entirely insufficient from which to drive the business. It wasn't going to be long before they had the ability to track consumers walking around their store and have the ability to market them in real time. And the processes, the technology, the capabilities and tools required for addressing and exploiting that is so very different from running a monthly or quarterly mailing. And therefore, that then kicked off a really significant operating model change for this particular client in order to better future-proof them against these seismic changes happening in the industry. And I'm sure you've all heard of the Internet of Things. I'm going to try and convince you that the Internet of Things is critical and is only going to get more critical from a marketing perspective. So by 2020, we're expected to have something like 25 billion connected devices. So that's smartphones, wearables, connected cars, connected devices in the home. There are going to be 4.9 billion people accessing 4G or more advanced networks across these devices. It's expected that something like 80% of the Fortune 1000 will be offering public APIs by the end of 2016, right? That's the end of next year. And that there's going to be something like 4.4 billion app users in the world. Now, the result of this is just a phenomenal and almost incomprehensible deluge of data. And the estimate is that by 2018 there's going to be something like 15.9 exabytes, I'll explain what that is in a second, exabytes of data of traffic per month just on the mobile network in about 2.5 years' time. So an exabyte is a unit of information storage. It's equivalent to 1 billion gigabytes, or 1,000 petabytes, or 1 followed by 18 zero bytes. So just an inordinate amount and volume of data. And that demands different approaches from an analytics perspective to really generate new insights and generate value from it. And the traditional structured data type approaches really are not relevant often in the world of truly big data. And we'll touch on some client examples and successes in that space very shortly. So I hope you don't feel that I'm labouring the point about just how big and how much bigger the data is getting, but just one final slide on that. So this is an example from Amazon Web Services. So Amazon Web Services took 6 years, so until 2012, to get 1 trillion objects stored in their cloud. It then just took 1 more year, so 2013, to double that. So these themselves are relatively old numbers, right? This has continued to accelerate. So in 2013 they had 2 trillion objects, so a doubling in the space of 1 year, and we're serving something like 11 million requests on that data a second. So how do we then use this to drive value and boost our clients' business? So really addressing this deluge of data and addressing the transformational impact that digital, social and mobile is having on the world is why Accenture Digital exists. And we've always had data and analytics absolutely at the core of what we do. And in a relatively short space of time we've grown to be a $5 billion business and one of the world's largest digital transformation consultancies in terms of revenue. But I think more importantly is that we've helped our clients capture over $100 billion in commerce and sales worldwide, whether that's from increased hotel reservations and bookings to increased products purchased, or indeed from a business-to-business perspective, helping smooth and digitize transactions. And we're now operating across 49 countries. So that's enough about digital disruption. Now I really want to talk about how conquering the data can really help brands and marketers navigate their own digital journeys and change the way the world lives and works. Before I jump into that though, just a quick note on Accenture Analytics. So Accenture Analytics is one of the key pillars of Accenture Digital, and it's the area that I and my team operate in. And we're around about a $3 billion business, and we have very much asset-powered. So by asset, I mean technological tools, assets. Something around 500 of those, around 400 of them patented and patent pending. And I'm very pleased to say that customer and marketing analytics has always been absolutely fundamental to what we do in analytics. So next I want to talk about how digital and the big data deluge that we're all feeling is really shaping marketing. And for me, it falls into to 4 key areas. First is the increasing demands that business has for growth using data and analytics. The second is around personalization and customer relevance and what we can do with the data that we have access to today in order to drive that. The third is the ever-growing demands to prove and demonstrate that we are being efficient and effective in our media, marketing and digital investments and the returns that they're generating for the business. And then finally, how we need to organize and operate in new ways in order to generate the maximum value from data and analytical insight in marketing. So we'll address each of those in turn. So the first is around business growth. So you've seen from what I've presented so far that the deluge of data that we're all feeling is only moving in one direction. It's only accelerating. So how do marketers and brands deal with an increasingly complex and evolving and competitive marketplace in order to achieve growth, when consumption and choices that both consumers have but also brands have of reaching those consumers is increasingly complex and fragmented? I'll talk through an example of that in a second in terms of a client that's certainly dealing with that in a very leading way. The second is around how we use this data to be more relevant and personalized at scale for consumers. What are the best routes to engage informed and empowered consumers who know what they want and want it when they want it? They're being increasingly demanding, particularly among kind of millennials. And the third area, and an area that I've started out my career in, is around marketing effectiveness. There is a strange dichotomy, both within and probably even more so outside of marketing. There is this feeling that, well, you have all this data now, so that's problem solved. You've got perfect data around your customers or potential customers, so everything should be optimized to the finest degree, and you should be accountable for every marketing dollar, euro, pound, yen that you're investing in customer marketing and digital activity. Actually, in my experience, the reverse is true. The reverse is true. That actually the deluge of data just makes that all the more difficult to achieve. But anyway, with the rise of digital, social, and mobile and other addressable marketing channels and activities, that pressure to demonstrate the link with business results and a positive return on investment for the entire marketing budget has only increased. But answering the question of which above the line, below the line, marketing channels and activities deliver the best ROI is still very much prevalent. So in marketing effectiveness, and I'll show an example in a second, is all about how can I understand from the past to really challenge and improve my marketing investment decisions for the future in order to drive the greatest returns, be that top-line value, bottom-line value, increased customer acquisition, loyalty, or driving some other softer or basket of measures for the business. And then finally, how can we adopt a more modern organization and operating model to thrive in this new and evolving market? So organization and capabilities required for success are rapidly evolving. Now, I almost feel that I got into marketing analytics 12 or so years ago. That was probably a little early. It was relatively straightforward at the time. It's become massively more complex, but massively more valuable over the last 10 or so years. So modern organization and organizing in order to exploit the data and analytical potential available today and that will be available in the near future is absolutely critical for success. So it's all about how we can leverage the explosion of data and the power of analytics to drive fact-based decisions across the organization. Not just doing data and analytics for the sake of it, but really driving that through to new and different and better decisions being made on the ground and value being felt from both the top and bottom line. So I want to touch on each of these areas and give some examples of how and where clients are leading in each of these areas. So the first area I want to talk about is how you organize to really conquer the data. Now, before I talk about the operating model here that I've put up, I just want to give some highlights from some Accenture research that we ran recently. So a study we ran back in 2012. The numbers have probably increased since then, but a study we ran there of 400 global marketing executives. More than 70% of the respondents recognized the need for major digital and marketing transformation within the organization to reach consumers and give their companies competitive advantage. So as digital budgets increased to fund this transformation, the heaviest investment is expected to be in customer experience and data and analytics capabilities. And accordingly, around 1/4 of senior marketers at the time were planning to dedicate between 40 and 60% of their employee time to marketing, media, and customer analytics. And that was a 2012 number, and it represented a 5% increase over the previous year. And again, that's just continued to increase year on year on well. I wouldn't be surprised if it's more like 50% of senior marketers dedicating between 40 and 60% of their employee time to media marketing and customer analytics today. So, how do you organize to conquer the data? So at a very high level, we think of the flow here as moving from data through to information, and then using analytics to move from information through to insights, and then critically moving from insights through to actual outcomes, actual changed and improved decisions on the ground. Now, the example that I'd like to touch on here is with a client who they're a global consumer goods business. Now, they are, as many consumer goods businesses are, immensely strong on data, and really very strong indeed in terms of what I would call traditional analytics. So using EPOS and syndicated and other forms of data to really get under the skin of both media, marketing, and digital performance, at least at a high level, but also using that data to understand consumer behavior in response to price and promotional activity. So this is a client who are sophisticated from a data and sophisticated from an analytics perspective, and have a whole global ecosystem of third-party analytics providers who are doing marketing return on investment, who are doing price and promotion analytics for their hundreds of brands across the world. But the business still has a significant challenge. And this is interesting. We ran some research around about 18 months ago, asking clients, not just marketing clients, although they were well represented, but asking board-level, C-level executives how and why analytics had failed within their organization. And the results were really very striking and really very polarized. It wasn't around a failure to be able to corral and process data. It wasn't so much around a failure around their ability to analyze the data. The failures, when they came, were far more on the right-hand side of the operating model here. It was around turning that data and analytics into really crisp strategic insights that the business was able to get behind, understand, and commit to doing things differently on the ground. So it's what I call the execution gap. And we see this time and time again with clients, that there are silos of excellence in data and in analytics, but often a real execution gap when it comes to driving that through to really crisp strategic insight and actual action and changed behavior by key decision makers within the business. And therefore, I hope you can see that to really conquer the data, actually getting your organization and getting your operating model right is of absolutely critical importance, because to not do so, you run the risk of spinning the wheels on lots of probably very good data and analytics, but the rubber will never hit the road in terms of turning that into changed action on the ground. So how this client chose to address this execution gap really does point to another trend in the business, or another trend in the industry, and that is that they chose to develop some really very, very lightweight role-based apps that were deployed onto the desktops and onto the tablets and smartphones of key decision makers. Now, this particular example is focused in the world of pricing. So the purpose of these lightweight mobile apps was to help guide and encourage pricing decision makers to make better decisions based on the analytics, and to then allow the business to measure the adoption rate of those changes and the top and bottom line impact that these better decisions were having. Now, these decision makers are not deep analytics experts, and these are hard-nosed sales and commercial people, and they're generally of the opinion that the very last thing they need to be successful is yet another tool, yet another data-driven process that they need to get to grips with. And I think being able to develop very, very lightweight role-based apps with a real focus on usability and user experience is very much to the fore currently. And I think Gartner put it brilliantly in their latest tech vision, where they said that analytics should be advanced and pervasive within the organization, but invisible. And what they mean by that is that decision makers should have tools at their fingertips that are powered by data and analytics, but shield them from the worst intricacies of the underlying data and models, and just basically help them and guide them to better decisions. So this is an example of a client that's both addressing their operating model and organization to really conquer the data, and using leading edge, very lightweight, agile developed assets and tools in order to encourage the decision makers on a day-to-day basis to make better decisions based on data and insight, data and analytics. And it's having and will continue to have a very significant impact on their top and bottom line. The next example I want to talk about is, so this is a client who I would say are really excellent and probably one of the world leaders in what I would call traditional marketing effectiveness. They have, over a number of years, developed very sophisticated techniques in order to assess their historic media marketing, digital, social return on investment, and then use that to make better and smarter investment decisions, at least at a macro level going forward. And they pushed this about as far as is reasonably efficient, and they regularly deliver double-digit increases in the efficiency and effectiveness of their marketing investments. And they've kind of hit all of the key critical success factors for good marketing ROI. So they have the right governance and operating model in place. They have really addressed and automated a lot of the data management that underpins this process for them to allow them to do it in an efficient and close to real-time way. They've deployed advanced tools onto key decision makers' desktops and tablet devices. They've organized themselves internally to really help drive from data and analytics into crisp strategic insight, and now have a very powerful strategic marketing effectiveness team whose role that is. And they've really adopted a culture of continuous test and learn. But as I say, this is what I would call traditional marketing mix and marketing effectiveness. So they had a real ambition to go further. And like most brands, their spending on digital continues to increase, and the importance of their e-commerce channel, again, continues to grow. So they had a desire to get a lot more from the data, analytics, and tools that they have from a digital data and attribution perspective. Now, the tools that they had deployed previously tended to be used in a very siloed and micro way, so making kind of micro decisions about particular keywords, making micro decisions on a day-to-day basis around which sites to advertise on. So really kind of pulling the levers in a very micro way. Now, I tend not particularly to like a distinction between traditional and digital marketing. I rather talk about addressable and non-addressable marketing. So if you consider the rise of digital marketing is running at something like, or investments in digital marketing is running at something like 11 or 12% a year. The rise of traditional is 2-3%, something like that. But the rise of addressable marketing, so by that I mean being able to address individual households or individual consumers, is growing at a far higher rate than digital is. And that's evidenced by the rise of programmatic buying. And I was with a media agency last week, and their vision for some of their larger clients is that by 2017, 100% of the buying there will be programmatic. So anyway, this client has a vision to completely integrate all of their digital and addressable marketing activity. So the bottom up, if you like, so cookie level, individual, household level data and analytics with their holistic and strategic marketing mix. And that is probably going to entail a 2-year journey for them, which is going to really have a very transformative impact on their business and organization, but is, and they think, going to significantly future-proof them against the rise of programmatic buying, and the need to really be joined up and understand consumers and consumer behavior across all channels and across all marketing touch points, be they digital or traditional. So the penultimate example I want to talk about is how to achieve relevance at scale. And we think about this at Accenture around the 4 R's. So to recognize, remember, relate, and recommend. So what do I mean by that? By recognize, I mean knowing your customers and prospects' profiles, including their demographic, geographic, or expressed or shared interests. Knowing your customers' history means knowing how they act, as expressed by how they browse and what they buy. And to deliver personalization within the context of the digital experience based on who they are, where they're located, and what time of year it is, or what time of day it is even. And really using data and analytics insights in real time, so that you can serve the right offer, the right product, the right recommendation to your customers or potential customers. So the example I want to give here is around, it's an e-commerce example, so an e-commerce client. I can't say what industry they're in. But one of the key drivers of profitability for this particular client is the sale of ancillary or related products to their core product at time of checkout. And the approach taken here is truly kind of leading in terms of it is big data analytics applied in real time, running live on their website and the back end systems to truly optimize the web experience, the products offered, and indeed the price of those products offered to consumers at time of checkout, to allow this brand to, on a minute-by-minute, hour-by-hour, day-by-day basis, to tune and optimize the revenue and profit from these incremental products and services that they offer. So how do we do that? Well, we do that through using leading and cutting-edge analytics techniques. So techniques such as machine learning, or deep learning as it's sometimes called. So these are techniques that don't rely on the kind of traditional business insight, well-structured, relatively slow-moving data that many of us are familiar with. These are techniques that exploit big data and variations in individual consumer behavior and performance in order to, in an automated and machine learning way, understand and really get under the skin of what's driving individual consumer behavior and performance. And the last example around boosting business through marketing analytics is that of this is a travel and tourism business, and they've really chosen to radically transform not just marketing within their business and their relationship with consumers, but actually this is having a transformative effect right across the business. So this is a very broad example of using data and analytics to truly conquer the business. So this is a whole suite of new and improved products, services, processes, capabilities, and people that are being deployed in areas such as driving more traffic through getting very deep into online marketing and programmatic buying, and actually producing new and improved bespoke algorithms and tools in order to drive up performance of their online marketing. The second is around driving more conversion, and this is a client that's been able to triple their conversion rate through big data and analytics and the implementation of a real-time personalization engine that's going deeper than just offering different products and services to individual browsers. It's actually radically changing the individual web experience for individual consumers. The third area where they've gone deep is around driving more customers, particularly around the efficiency and effectiveness of their campaigns. And they've, in the last year, more than doubled the effectiveness of their online and offline campaigns through data and predictive analysis. And then lastly, and this is where we're impacting well outside of marketing, is using all of this data and analytic and customer and marketing insight to actually help other areas of the business around demand forecasting, for example, and helping identify and optimize choices of locations for new sites. So all of that underpinned with digital dashboards and good data and analytics tools and capability. So I think I've just about run to time. So I hope you've seen through this that the opportunity and the challenge presented by data is simply huge and increasing. But for those organizations that are willing and able to organize themselves around these seismic shifts in the industry, are really able to not just defend, but really differentiate and disrupt when they get it right. So with that, I think we'll pass back for any questions.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Conor, for sharing those insights from your experience, and that's been really fascinating, and I, for one, have found that a really illuminating session, and indeed I think our audience have as well, because we've received quite a few questions throughout the webinar, and I'd like to put as many of those as I can to you now as we carry on. So the first one is quite a straightforward question, but I doubt whether the answer is. I don't know. The question is, who in the organisation, in your view, should own the data? Is it something that to be owned by marketing, operations, IT perhaps, or finance? What's your view on that?
There's as many, unfortunately, there's as many answers to that as there are as there are brands. It really can and does differ widely. There's no one simple, perfect, and concise answer to that. I think I'm a great fan and advocate of getting ownership as close towards, or indeed in, the more commercial, financial, customer, market-focused areas of the business. I think when the ownership, particularly the ownership of action, right? So there's different types of ownership, right? So it's, of course, IT, the CIO, the CTO should own the storage and provision of data within the organization. But critically, there needs to be owners for, if you like, the right-hand side of the operating model. So driving from data and analytics through to insight and action. And that, I feel, really needs to be owned by the more sort of marketing, sales, commercial, and financial functions within the organization. Because otherwise you're left with this, as I mentioned, this execution gap, this inability to turn data and insight into strategic action on the ground.
Okay, thanks, Conor. The next one gets to a point you made during your talk when you were thinking about Facebook videos. I think one of the comments is it really fair to compare the number of views of Facebook videos to YouTube? Because the particular point is that the default setting for Facebook is autoplay, which infers perhaps that a high percentage of the videos are being watched in a passive way, while on YouTube people are proactively searching for them, perhaps assuming that a small percentage are autoplay from websites. But there's quite a difference between that passive and active viewing of those videos.
So I think most viewing these days is passive, all right. Maybe YouTube is slightly less passive. And yes, the Facebook number was based on some very, very lightweight definition of viewability. Now, they did say they have, and they may publish, a more stringent set of data around, I think it was a 95% threshold around viewability. But that said, look, with the rise and rise of multi-screening, I know I'm guilty of it, that I think most viewing is relatively passive these days. But that said, I think that I want to make a wider point around that. You know, we see many brands, measuring what's easy to measure in digital or social or mobile. And obviously, views is a relatively simple measure. The number of fans you have on Facebook for your brand is a relatively simple measure. And very often, though, when it comes to trying to drive value from that, we often see that these simple digital, social, mobile measures have really very little bearing on business performance, and that you really have to go a lot deeper into the metrics and numbers in order to come up with what the really critical KPIs, if I can use that term, what the real KPIs are from a digital perspective. So an example of that would be a retailer that I work with, where they religiously measure and report number of fans, number of active fans, number of various degrees of engagement within fans. But actually, when you dig into it and look at what's really driving sales performance, from a social perspective, it was positive shares of the brand-generated content. Now, this was a measure that was not particularly being used or reported on within the business, but it had a much, much bigger relationship with actual incremental sales performance than any of these kind of softer, easier measures that were being used. And that then sparked off a lot of activity in terms of additional content generation and publication from this particular brand. So no, it's probably not, to answer the question though, no, it's probably not fair. And yes, of course, there are different degrees of passivity. But what I would say is that there are big opportunities to better use data and analytics to really understand what the critical performance indicators are. And then they can be used to, in a more forward-looking way, to improve your strategy around things like content, as I mentioned.
Okay, thanks, Conor. Right, moving on to think about smaller businesses. Quite a lot of the examples I think you gave there were about larger firms, and we've got a couple of questions which I'll try and put to you together, if it's not unfair to bounce a multiple question at you, about how smaller businesses can use some of these techniques. So thinking of it in two parts. Firstly, how can SMEs with small budgets tap into and benefit from this kind of big data that you've been talking about? And practically, where would they start from? What would be the sort of number one priority and maybe the couple of things that should follow on behind that?
Okay. So very happy to answer that, but I do need to caveat it slightly in that Accenture only works with kind of Fortune 100 companies. So, but I will do my very best to answer it. And I guess I will break the answer into three different areas. So, people, process, and technology. So, from a people perspective, I actually think small organizations do have some. There are some advantages to smaller organizations from a people perspective. You think about the sorts of skills required for success here are not your typical big business insight, data and analytics skills. You know, everyone, I'm sure you've heard of kind of the rise of the data scientist. Now, I kind of draw a distinction between traditional business intelligence and data analytics and reporting and the new world of the data scientist. So traditional BI tends to deal with highly structured data, you know, coming from your enterprise resource planning systems and, you know, all of the other big corporate systems that we have. And then applying very tried and tested analytics techniques like econometrics and other things on top of that. Whereas the data scientist is operating in more of the big data realm and using different and new analytics techniques in order to get to value in entirely unknown areas for brands. Now, why is that relevant? It's relevant because the whole kind of spirit and mentality of a data scientist should really, or is more that of a kind of data hacker. And larger organizations can find it difficult to attract and retain people with that sort of mindset, whereas smaller brands, startup brands, can actually be more attractive to a data scientist than a very large corporate entity. So that'd be one. So from a people perspective, I think smaller organizations do have a potential. There are potential benefits there. From a technology perspective, again, the very leading big data and analytics platforms are largely open source. You know, be it using R for analytics, you know, Hadoop and Spark and all of the other kind of big data analytics tools and platforms. Many are open source, and the cost of computing has come down to such an extent that it's really not a barrier to entry anymore for anyone, not even individuals. Now, that said, from a process perspective, I think that's where larger organizations do have you know, potential benefits. But certainly, I think the barriers from a people and from a tools perspective are lower than they've ever been for small and medium-sized enterprises. But what's key is attracting a small core of data and analytics talent into the organization from which to build.
Okay, that's interesting, Conor, because it leads quite nicely into the next question that's popped in, which is thinking about the issue of skills. And you know, what you've been talking about has significant skills implications for organisations of any size. How do you see is the best way for companies to upskill existing workforces to get them to be able to make the most of data and analytics?
So I think it's really through two things. And I think that the easier of the two is, you know, what I mentioned earlier around the fact that analytics really should be advanced and pervasive in the organization, but really entirely invisible to most of the users of it. Now that's the best way to get a step change in data and analytics driven capability within the organization, and doesn't and shouldn't require that everyone goes back to university and does a bachelor's, master's and PhD in some quant subject. So really ensuring that you have the operating model and tools that enable you to allow analytics to be advanced and pervasive, but really invisible to most of the end users is the first piece. The second is, look, the market is absolutely red hot currently, both in the UK and right across the world for both graduates with STEM subject backgrounds who want to work in data and analytics, and even rarer are those people with practical experience in marketing and in other functional areas of the application of data and analytics to business challenges. What we find there and what we see, just having grown our own business, is just how important it is to get to a critical mass, and how we run and operate our own business has changed as well, in terms of how we both attract and retain and incentivize and keep data science folks happy within the organization. It's quite different from other areas. I think that's by far and away the bigger of the two challenges. But businesses can go a long way by addressing that first piece around getting analytical tools into the hands of decision makers in a way that doesn't make it complex for them.
Okay, and thinking about the kind of data that's been analysed, I think quite a lot of what you were talking about, or at least some of it, was being quite smart and quite quick and using data sometimes almost in real time as it becomes available. But what about other data that an organisation might hold, information that may, for example, be archived? What's your view on ways, if it's worth doing at all, on ways of using older data in terms of marketing and delivering customer value, so gathering insights from that older data, perhaps without risk of being repetitive?
I guess it depends what the questioner means by old. Now, old for me would typically mean more than 2 or 3 years old. They may have meant old as in last week rather than yesterday, but we don't know. So
we don't know. We don't know. So I guess perhaps not real time, and perhaps not older than a couple of years ago. So within your time frame, perhaps.
I think there is still absolutely enormous benefit to doing that more high-level, strategic type analytics to understand business dynamics at a high level. So to understand what the macro influence of my competitor prices or my competitor media marketing activity is on my own business performance. To understand at a macro level what the totality of the incremental revenue and profit driven by my media marketing and digital investments is at a national or regional level. That's still extremely important. But where I think a lot of the focus and attention on is in being able to provide relevant experiences and products at scale to consumers live. So I'm absolutely not discounting the need for that more considered strategic use of data and analytics. I absolutely see those two things going absolutely hand in hand. But where a lot of interest and where a lot of value is today is in both being able to use that data and analytics in a more real-time way to provide better products, services, recommendations, web experience, whatever it is to consumers in real time, but also in the unlocking of incremental value from these big, unstructured, messy data sets that brands and marketers have access to. So what do I mean by that? I mean by scraping blog posts or having fire hydrant access to Twitter. This is really messy data, but data in which there are huge potential value and insight for organizations. But certainly I don't advocate throwing data away unless it's absolutely necessary to do so.
Okay, looking at messy data, we've got a questioner here who clearly works in the franchise industry, and I'm guessing automotive because that's a specific example given. If we take that one, in the automotive industry, you tend to have a large pot of data, but it's split between hundreds of dealers, and there's rarely central direct access. How would you tackle the compartmentalised data from a central level in that sort of situation?
Right. So automotive, all clients in all industries think and often tell me that they're unique or special. I think automotive is is unique and special in that regard. It's enormously messy, and this is not an Accenture anecdote, but the only time I ever shook hands and politely walked away from a client opportunity was in automotive, and exactly because of this issue. That said, as digital becomes an ever-increasing component of customers' slow journey towards the purchase of an automobile, then that does unlock more potential for analytical insight and value. And it's happening now, but it's going to really accelerate over the next few years as well around things like the connected car. So I think a lot of the kind of legacy data issues that we feel today in some industries, and automotive is a good example, will very quickly, over the space of months or a very short number of years, be relegated to the past, with the rise of connected car and the rise of the importance of digital and mobile as part of the purchase funnel and journey for automotive consumers. I know I didn't really answer the question. I'm looking ahead, but
yeah, it's actually a hard one to answer, I think, without getting into the specifics of the firms involved, I think. But I think we're coming close to the end now, but there's time for one, maybe two more. And perhaps just at the end, we've got several questioners asking similar questions. You've mentioned various tools along the way, Conor, and I'd mentioned that some of them are quite freely and easily available, so suitable even for the smallest of businesses. Are there any tools that you'd particularly recommend?
So, I can simply rattle off a whole list of tools, but they all do different things. They're all four different things. So, just from an analytics and model building perspective, 5-10 years ago it was all about SAS and SPSS. Obviously, there's been just a huge rise in the use of R, and then more kind of industry strength versions of R, like Revolution R, which has recently been bought by Microsoft. So certainly from an analytics perspective, there's a much bigger focus on these open source tools such as R. As the data gets bigger and as the data gets messier, the power and value that can be derived from really good data visualization continues to increase. So tools like ClickView and Tableau in that space. And increasingly we're kind of prioritizing skills in D3, which is open source data visualization tools and techniques. Data processing and the degree to which you can automate the pain of data processing, getting ready for analytics, again, is just getting more and more painful. And there's excellent tools like Alteryx on the market for doing that. And then when it comes to big data storage and processing, be it real time or otherwise, then there's a lot of focus around Hadoop and Spark and services like Cloudera. But
Thank you, Conor. I think I'm going to have to cut in there. almost halfway through your last question because we're literally about to run out of time.
Okay.
We've come to the full hour, and there's been so much interest. And I think people have found it as insightful and as fascinating as I have, because we've had loads of questions. But that's all we have time for. So thank you very much. And just to the audience, thank you all for participating. Hope you found the content useful, and we'd love to hear any feedback. So please do take the survey on the screen. And just a reminder that a link will be emailed to you shortly, and you'll be able to access this also on the opinion page on the CIM website. So it only remains to say thank you very much for attending, and good afternoon from CIM. Thank you.